各位观众，大家好。针对席卷美国的黑人生命运动及其引发的抗议浪潮，运动分子呼吁解散整个警察部门。不同背景的纽约人怎么看？今天记者连线警务专家罗佰能Robert Brown 先生，他在退休前担任纽约华埠五分局的副局长，熟悉华人社区，精通美国司法制度。我们请他谈一谈。So, Mr. Brown, what do you think of the reasons for the recent surge in crime in New York City?
That the surge in crimes is directly related to the abolishment of the plainclothes units, the anti-crime units. Those are the units that are proactive in enforcement. Without those units, people, I think, feel very comfortable carrying guns around. And that's why we have a giant spike in shootings. You know, I think by the time the numbers come in for this week, it's probably over 1,000% increase in shootings this week compared to the same week a year ago.
Do you think that the bail reform also connected to the surge of the crime nowadays?
Yes. They actually, during the whole COVID pandemic, they made some changes to the bail reform that a lot of people aren't aware of. So that there are certain crimes that now you cannot have bail for, mostly crimes involving crimes against children, homicides, where you could have released somebody without bail. Now a judge can set bail for those things. But I think most importantly is they emptied a lot of the jails because of the coronavirus, and you have people that are recidivists that are getting out. So they just keep getting arrested over and over again, going through the system and coming right back out to commit more crimes. I think that people are afraid to go out in public right now, and I think that there's no penalty. I mean, you could see during a lot of the protests, people were doing things like, graffitiing St. Patrick's Cathedral or looting stores, and the New York County District Attorney was refusing to prosecute them and letting them back out with no charges whatsoever.
Some people want to end the punishment culture in criminal justice. What do you think?
I think that police officers right now are very frustrated. I think that they're not making a lot of arrests. I think that is emboldening people to commit crimes. And I think a lot of the protesters, the peaceful protesters, in those protests, you had people that were anarchists and troublemakers that were hiding in the groups of peaceful protesters and doing things like destroying stores, looting places, that they were acting like criminals. When it comes to the whole police system, I'm sure you've heard a lot of talk about defunding the police. Shutting police departments down is a bad idea, obviously, right? There's some talk of sending unarmed social workers out first. And the problem is that you don't necessarily know what you're walking into when you're a police officer. So what might be a call that sounds like a routine call, when you arrive on the scene, could be a very dangerous call. So I don't think that that's necessarily a good idea to send unarmed people out to handle police work. I think it's a very dangerous idea. I do think when people are saying defund the police, the rational ones aren't really looking to defund entire departments. They're looking to take money from certain aspects of the police and use it for other things. So you might have, we just, I'm sure you saw they're cutting NYPD by $1 billion. Now, we don't really know if that's real. You know, I've at least seen some stories that what they're really doing is just shuffling it. So that you know, we have school safety that now falls under NYPD. They were taking that $1 billion and moving it to schools, but it's still going to be school safety under NYPD. They're just playing a game with the numbers. They're playing with the numbers. Whether that's true or not, we won't know until we see a final budget. But, you know, if you say, does the police department have places where they can cut and still maintain safety? I believe that they do. There's a lot of people in administrative jobs. You know, you might have a job that could be done by a civilian secretary that's being done by a police officer getting paid $100,000 a year. So there's plenty of places where they can trim the budget safely and not affect people's safety, right? But to say we're going to defund police departments, and there has been none that have happened yet. I know in Minneapolis, there's been a vote by the city council to defund the police department, but I don't think it's taken place yet.
So you mean that there is no such kind of example from the past in the US?
It hasn't happened. In the past, it's never happened.
Never.
Ever. Right. You know, currently they're contemplating it in certain places, and they're contemplating cutting budgets. And like I said, I understand if you say, listen, we want to take X amount of dollars from the police department and use it for education or use it for people with drug problems to receive treatment.
Yeah.
You know, you can rationally approach this and do it in a way that can protect people and make sure that they're safe. You have to be very cautious to say we're going to not have police. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we can maintain the safety of the people of New York City if we eliminate the New York City Police Department. I don't think that our society behaves itself well enough that we can exist without police, because as we know, there are good people and there are bad people. Mm-hmm. And bad people will take advantage of the fact that they're not being held by our standards, by our morals, by our laws. And if there's no penalty for violating a law, then people are going to violate the law. And if there's nobody to catch them violating the law, then they're going to do it. You know, so we're in a position where we're at a time in my life that I've never seen anything like it before, right? And again, you know, if somebody approaches it rationally, and I don't think necessarily in New York City, the city council and the mayor are approaching it rationally. But if they approach it rationally, there are plenty of places where you can redistribute the budget from NYPD to other things that make sense, but not the entire budget, mm-hmm. right? You can shuffle things around.
So normally the first responder is always the police, and that's what the leftists call the strange arm police, and not the mental health and social workers.
Right. And, you know, years ago, when I first became a cop, when they sent an ambulance, they used to send the police to protect the ambulance, right? And then they stopped doing that. They just send ambulances by themselves. So you have to figure that sending just a medical professional or a social worker, if you arrive at the scene and you have somebody who's, say, threatening their family with a knife, what's a social worker going to do? You know, I mean, there are times where people don't act rationally, whether they have mental health issues, whether they're intoxicated on drugs, that when you take that into consideration, you can't send an unarmed person to deal with that. It's not safe. It's not safe for the person responding. It's not safe for the bystanders. or the family members of the person that's acting irrationally.
Yeah. And you know any background of this, like the Black Lives Matter?
You know, Black Lives Matter has been around since about 2014. And I think that if you look at Black Lives Matter, they're not necessarily the people that are engaged in the destruction or in the criminality. I think that when I was saying before that there are people that are embedded with them, it are these, when I was referring to as anarchists, the Antifa type of people that hide themselves in Black Lives Matter. And most of the time, if you look at the crowds, they're not predominantly Black that are out there protesting, right? In fact, a lot of the people out in support of Black Lives Matter are white and or Asian, right? So within those crowds, you can get Antifa people that will hide amongst the crowd and use the opportunity to either, you know, when this was first happening, I was describing the people looting as opportunists, right? Where somebody broke into the front of a Gucci store, they may go in and steal because they have the opportunity to steal, but it might not have been their idea. I think what was happening in Chinatown and Manhattan was separate and apart from people that were opportunists. I think that you had well-organized groups of people targeting certain businesses, for example, pharmacies, right? And breaking into pharmacies and specifically stealing the opioids, right? To sell, as opposed to you just going into a pharmacy and you're grabbing anything that has value. They were targeting, and I know of at least two in Chinatown that I became aware of that were looted, and the opioids specifically were targeted. That's not a protest about the life of George Floyd, right? That is a criminal hiding in amongst the peaceful protesters, using it as an opportunity to engage in further criminality and maybe take those opioids and resell them at a high price on the street.
Yeah. And I remember the store owners complained that when they called the 911, it's no use, no people come. And they wait until the situation getting uncontrolled or even worse, then they show up. So.
Well, yeah, I've been retired a long time, right? It's actually 20 years now since I worked in NYPD in the 5th Precinct. But I was listening to the police radio at the time, and you have to realize that they have to deal with the large crowds that are sort of in front of them. And I think that if those crowds were starting to loot, the police department took immediate action. If separate and apart from those crowds, other splinter groups came and tried to do certain things, there wasn't necessarily the amount of police officers needed to respond to that and to address it. And I think that's probably where the frustration lies, is that when you have such large crowds, they pull the workforce of the police department and they use them for the crowds and not necessarily responding to the regular calls when people call 911. Mm-hmm. They go down to a skeleton crew to answer the 911 calls. So, you know, it's something where I guess you have to prioritize what to do. If it's a serious call, if it's let's say a shooting call or something like that, they would put that over the citywide division so everybody would hear it, in addition to putting it over the local division, which would be, you know, in Chinatown's case, the 5th, or in Brooklyn, the 7-2, or in Queens, the 109, you know, for example. So I do believe that there were probably times where they didn't have sufficient people to respond. But, you know, over the course of time, I guess things should have gotten better as the protests have died down.
Well, I guess that because the NYPD is the one of the most excellent police force in the world. So before before the taking the robbery, they do all the kind of the terrible things. The NYPD should get information in advance, right?
Well, you would think that, and they may still be doing that, is identifying people that they have on video committing certain crimes, and then trying to go out and arrest those people. You know, I would anticipate that they're doing that. But I think that the frustration from the police department was that they're only one part of the system. So once they were arresting those people, the district attorneys were declining to prosecute.
Yeah.
Right? So you'd go out and you'd arrest somebody. And especially when the looting was really going crazy, they were arresting people, and then the New York County prosecutor was refusing to prosecute.
Yeah.
So they were coming right back out and doing the same thing again the next night. And it's really hard to control rioters when that happens.
They're talking about the training required for the full-time police before they go in.
I saw that you sent me a question.
Yeah.
I don't know where in the world a barber has to go through 1,600 hours of training to be a barber. I don't know. So that's 40 weeks at 40 hours a week. I don't know where that number is. I'm sure in New York that number is much, much lower. But here in NYPD, you have 40 hours a week of training for 6 months in the police academy. They have firearms training, they have tactical training, they have first aid training. And then on top of that, you have field training, where you go out and you field train with a field training officer. So that question that you had sent me by email, certainly does not apply here. I mean, there may be smaller departments that don't have the resources that NYPD has, but you have to figure that NYPD is probably the best trained police department in the country.
Mm-hmm. And also, could you explain the qualified immunity? What's that policy about?
So a couple of things have happened where there's protections that municipalities have and there's protections that police have. And for example, there was a law that protected police officers' records, their personnel records, right? So Governor Cuomo repealed that law. And I know a lot of police officers were upset because they thought that pretty much they were going to make their public, their home address public. That's not really the spirit of what happened. If a police officer, let's say, has been sued numerous times or has a lot of substantiated complaints against them, some people feel that they should have, that information should be available to the public. And if a police officer commits misconduct and he gets sued or she gets sued, you should be able to use that in the lawsuit, right? If the police officer is a bad police officer and uses unnecessary force a lot and keeps getting in trouble for it, that's information that will now be publicly available because of the repeal of 50A of the Civil Service Law. Separate and apart from that is a theory of qualified immunity. And to try and explain it simply, it protects the city from bad acts by bad police officers. Mm-hmm. For the city saying, oh, I didn't know, right? So I do expert police work. I'm a police expert. For example, I was contacted by someone where a police officer engaged in serious misconduct, criminal misconduct against a woman and sexually assaulted her. That municipality upstate, the little town, moved to dismiss and said, we're protected by qualified immunity. That wasn't one of our patterns or practices. So qualified immunity, getting rid of it, is not the worst thing I've ever heard of. It really protects the public in cases of bad police officers. That's what qualified immunity protects the city, in our case, if a police officer is bad. Getting rid of it will protect the public against bad police officers. So, hang on one second. Yeah, so I don't think that that's a bad thing.
Okay, so it's opposite as what the people thought. People think that read the name, they saw that, well, this is the police can do a lot of things and without not take accountable for the bad action.
Yeah, I think by getting rid of qualified immunity, police officers, and specifically their employers, the municipalities, will be more responsible for what they do. So in the case, let's just say, of George Floyd, right? The family of George Floyd sues Minneapolis. Under qualified immunity, Minneapolis may try and get out of being responsible for the bad acts of those police officers. So I don't think getting rid of qualified immunity is a bad thing. I think that it will make cities and towns and counties pay more attention to their police officers and make sure that they don't do the wrong thing.
Is there systematic racism in American history and social system?
In American history, you would have to say yes, right? In the criminal justice system, there is no doubt that certain groups of people are disproportionately incarcerated in America. And you know, whether that's because of racism or that's because of socioeconomic issues is an issue. Because if you, I think personally, and if you hire a lawyer as opposed to using a free lawyer, you generally get a better outcome because the lawyer that you hire doesn't have as many cases and you're paying that lawyer to focus on your case. Where if you're poor and you use a public defender, that public defender is overworked. They might have 100 or 200 cases, so they can't focus on the case, which gets a worse result. So, you know, whether it's intentional systemic racism, I don't know. I think it's the whole country, right? You know, different states, different systems. I think it's the way the system is set up may have, and does have, clearly does have, racially disproportionate results, right? So when you look at it, you're going to get a different result, I think, if you use a free lawyer than if you have the money to pay for a lawyer. There's certainly, like I said, there are certainly people manipulating this movement to try and achieve things that they want to achieve. And you know, some things, like I said, the getting rid of the civil service law protecting police officers with bad records, it's probably a good thing. You know, getting rid of qualified immunity, protecting municipalities and cities from the wrongdoing of bad police officers, it's probably a good thing. You know, so some good things may come out of this. But, you know, defunding the police and eliminating police forces is crazy. Yeah. I don't think that that's a smart move. I don't think that our society has the self-control to behave itself without the police.
I heard some people, they compare the anti-police movement with Hong Kong roysters, but actually a lot of things are different. The purpose, the government response, and a lot of things different.
I watched a lot of what was going on in Hong Kong, and I think, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, right? But I think the reason why the people were protesting in Hong Kong was because they didn't want to lose their autonomy. They didn't want to be brought back to mainland China to be charged with crimes. Yeah. And I thought that the police response that I saw was particularly brutal. You know, there was a lot of force used on protesters, even protesters that were acting in a peaceful manner. The videos I saw were they were being harshly treated, and a lot of force was being used against them. So I certainly see differences, and you know, you're talking about changing a major part of the system in Hong Kong and taking away people's right to autonomy and really subjecting them to rule from mainland China and criminal prosecution. So I know that a lot of people were very upset by that. We are at a crossroad, there's no doubt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.